Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kinia and Rachel Jam. And today we have such a juicy topic for you. For those of you listening to this space for the first time, my name is Kinia Romanowska. I'm a mom of two and founder and CEO of Pros&Babes, and we're celebrating 4 years this year. And this is Rachel Jones, mama and marketing manager at Kepler Academy, a leading childcare provider in Edmonton. Hello, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Kinia, for the awesome introduction.
Thank you. And I see we are having some technical issues on one of our platforms, so I'm going to remove it. Yes. Okay. All right. I don't know what's going on, but anyway, we seem to still be live. So today we do have such an important conversation about being a working mom in Canada and how our careers affect our children. So just so you know, before we dive in, Rachel and I have about 8 pages of notes that I prepared. I used to be an investigative journalist. And when I prepared these resources for moms on maternity leave a few years ago, gosh, I came across all this info, the $1 million wealth gap, the motherhood penalty. I hope our kids will never have to use that term, because we shouldn't use motherhood and penalty in one sentence, right? Anymore. I hope that we can eradicate that. I use it to raise awareness, but it's just sad that we have that term was coined and that it exists and that we have to, abolish the motherhood penalty or however, but it's real in terms of how being a mom, impacts our careers, our well-being, right? Our bottom line, everything. Yes. The world has a lot of catching up to do to having women in the workforce, women who bear children and who just experience working life differently and who carry a lot, right? Whether it was pregnancy loss, whether it's insomnia, whether it's physical complications after having kids. You don't just, companies kind of the setting is like you kind of come back and you have to navigate it as if nothing happened if you want to compete in the market, right? So there's such a huge philosophical debate we could have about this, about capitalism and how you perform professionally and yada yada yada. But the reality is, the bottom line is, there's still so much work and conversation to be done so that the next generation doesn't experience the motherhood penalty. And it's going to take mothers and fathers alike and all of that, talking about that. So we'll go over a bunch of stats today, and then in the second part of our conversation, we're going to be asking some fundamental questions, because the data around how our career affects our children, I pulled up stuff. It's a very tricky conversation to have, right? And I think many of us have worries about, well, what does it, how will me working outside the home affect my children's well-being? It's a valid question to have, and I think we need to be strategic in asking the right questions and answers for how you ultimately make your decisions as a family. The pandemic has stretched everybody so thin, and many parents have found that it's difficult to have 2 people working outside of the home, even if they're working from home, but they're kind of working for a company outside of the home. So, Rachel, do you have anything to add to this sweeping introduction?
No, I think it's going to be great to get into the statistics. And as I read through your research and what you've put together here, there's just some things that really stood out to me that I circled, and some stuff that I watched that I think are really things that I want to bring up in the discussion, because I think for the most part, some of us, especially those of us who have never had this kind of conversation before, maybe things that we've noticed and things that we haven't, and we didn't chalk it up to much. But when you come into this conversation about motherhood and penalty, then you start to think, wow, this really does exist. And I have seen it in so many ways. So yeah,
absolutely. And we need to be paying attention in 2022 if we really want to change for ourselves and for the next generation, for our finances, for our career progressions. I told you in 2022, I think I have to scream just a little bit louder, because I'm so used to saying this stuff, but we should not, you and I were talking right before the live, like, would you ever send your husband to eat a steak in the toilet?
Never.
No. Yet so many women end up having to pump in the toilet because that's the only place where they would have privacy, right? And so
Huh? Would your husband ever eat a steak in the toilet, I think, is the question. And the answer is a resounding no, never. Are you kidding? If you ask your husband to eat a steak, he's a cook. If you ask him to eat a steak in the toilet.
Okay, so Camille, you're in the comments here. I know you're checking in from Brussels. You're a dad. Would you ever eat your steak in the toilet? And you really like good food. I know you're a gourmet person.
Never.
Never, right? So, like, how come?
Never seen it.
So how come, women should not be pumping in the toilet, essentially, right? We should. And when I was interviewing an amazing woman yesterday and talking about why should we encourage more women to be in STEM? Because I hear that, right? No, Camille says no, absolutely. So I talked to her, why should we encourage more women and girls to be in STEM? Because when I hear about some of the discrimination, like I've heard some horrible stories of mothers to other mothers saying, I had a penalty for having children, so you're going to have a penalty too. Suck it up. That's the type of stuff women still hear today in the 21st century. This should not be happening, and this is why I think we need.
Why is that? Why would women want to penalize other women, or why would women want to? This is just what I had to go through, so you're going to have to deal with it too. Where does that attitude come from?
I think bitterness and having been in the trenches, and we get to a point where we get blasé, and we just kind of stick with the status quo. I don't know. I mean, again, that would be for another conversation, but I digress a little bit. Essentially, we do need to make still more strides as it comes to working motherhood and fatherhood as well. One of my plans too for 2022, and I'm getting those requests, is to involve fathers more. But let's get into some of our statistics, okay? So I'm going to quote Canadian magazine Maclean's, and that was from the Journal of Family Psychology. So 2 quotes here. But why would we work as mothers? Because sometimes it can get really hard. And many women like there's a lot of benefits. We studied, we like the intellectual stimulation, but then when you get to a point sometimes where enough feels like enough. So here's a quote. Work offers mothers some pretty important opportunities and resources that may promote parenting and a sense of well-being. It minimizes social isolation and helps develop and refine skills like problem solving, dealing with diverse sets of people, and working as a team. Those abilities lend themselves to motherhood because they provide children with the kinds of environments and experiences that they need to do well in the world, right? So work is so much more than a paycheck. It gives us a routine. It gives us an opportunity to get dressed and get out of the house. At least it used to. I wrote these notes before the pandemic. Use our intellectual skills, have relationships with other educated adults. These are things we can truly take for granted when we're on maternity leave with a baby. While being a working mom has many benefits for women and for children, we still have a way to go when it comes to consequences women face for taking time off to care for their little ones. And not only that, but for their elders too, right? That's another piece that comes up. You think like you're done taking care of your kids, and then boom, you're taking care of your parents or other dependents, and sometimes at the same time. So Rachel, when you read that first paragraph, what came to mind for you?
I thought it was a funny thing to ask a question about. Well, first of all, I love that Maclean brings this topic up, but I find it a funny question. Why is working important to mothers? Why should a career be important to mothers? Even mothers who do decide to stay at home and not go back to their career, even asking that question of a mother, like that seems funny to me, because like you said, for all of those reasons, it's important to have your career and go to work, quote unquote. But again, a job is not just a way to earn an income and keep yourself alive. I think that it's so much more than that, for all the reasons you mentioned. And also too, it's part of success. So whatever definition of success you have in your life, whether or not it is, success is going to have a combination of financial and personal, I guess on your own personal scorecard, whatever success looks like. Yeah. But it's not just financial, and it's so much more than that. It's who you are as a person. It's your vocation. When we're children, like kids dress up as a firefighter, kids dress up as a scientist. Like it's part of your thread. It's part of your makeup as a person, not just as a mother or a father or a parent. It's more than that. So I feel like your work has a lot to do with your identity. And that's why career is important for women just as much as it is for men. And, I don't think I've heard any man being asked, why is your career important to you? So I find it funny that
we should be asking those questions, shouldn't we? Not just of mothers, but of men, because we just default so much of the definition of success in society is around career, but there's so many aspects of our life where we can define success where we're not used to. So anyway, go ahead.
That social constructs. So in the handout and all the research that you've done too, you do talk about, you look at statistics over time as well. So when we're looking at, 1976 versus 2014, and what percentage of couples or what percentage of families were dual income earners versus single income earners, and I guess, what's the ideal setup and what's the ideal, I guess, household for income earning. It's interesting to look at those statistics, and also how society's perceptions of, I guess, roles and families and, even like gender and all these different things, how they've been changing and growing and evolving. And now how this whole idea of supporting women in their careers who are also mothers is now coming up. And I feel like this should not be a surprise conversation anymore. Like you said, it should be something that's very obvious, as we change the concept of what it means to be a family and what it means to have careers. These things need to evolve and change as well.
I mean, we do know that having two parents working and juggling all the responsibilities of managing a household is very stressful. And the majority of families these days are dual income earning families, although the statistics we have here is that actually Alberta, where you and I are, has had the lowest proportion of dual earning family at 6 families in 2014, 65% of couples. So, I mean, that's still more than half. The highest was in Saskatchewan and Quebec at 74 and 73%. So, we do know that it is stressful to have two parents working, and it does provide so many advantages, but it feels like you're constantly go, right? And so childcare is the bare minimum support system you need, and there are a number of other layers that you need to add to not feel like you're drowning, right? You usually need some support at home when the kids are so young. So yes, for me it was surprising, Rachel, when I like thinking of growing up. I came to Canada when I was 4, and then I'm thinking about the childcare that I received. But I was shocked to realize that the early childcare education or childcare is not something that we've agreed upon as a country. To me, that was just mind blowing, right? We know that kids go to kindergarten and grade 1, but I had this assumption that, I mean, we've got it figured out as a society where women and men work. And so, but no, and even with the subsidies right now coming in, I wrote to my local politician asking, like, so does this apply to everyone, or still doesn't seem to apply for everyone? So was that a shock to you when you became a working mom, that we haven't figured this out as a country in Canada?
Well, this is something that as I've made close friendships with different parents in other countries around the world and start to learn about what they do compared to what we do here, that's where this conversation came up. And when I became a mom is when I started having it and thinking about it. For example, one of my very close friends in the Netherlands, it's very different what they do there and how they split up their work week and how they're able to have more flexibility for parents versus here. And also how childcare is subsidized. So definitely shocking. And this new announcement from the government, I mean, it was a relief for a lot of families who, I have conversations with literally hundreds of parents and hundreds of mothers. And for some of them, with twins, for example, childcare expenses previously were laughable. Parents weren't able to justify even financially they would be paying to work because they would, of the amount of childcare fee they would have to pay for early learning. So this new investment in early learning, I think, is a long time coming. And I think that parents are very relieved to have this extra support. So it's worthwhile news to hear, and definitely timely, because 2022 is a year of recovery, I think. At least that's what I'm hopeful for. And I think that parents will be excited to have this extra support. And it's going to be very big, very big. Transformational, somebody said. I like that word. I think that it's a good word to use.
Absolutely. Well, for those who are just tuning in and popping in the conversation, and I should add a banner, but our conversation today is being a working mom in Canada in the 21st century and how our careers affect our children. So the first part of the conversation is dedicated to that, right? We're looking at some data, and granted, I mean, I did not pull up the latest numbers after COVID. I'm sure the statistics have varied and changed because we know that many women are quitting the workforce, right, during the pandemic. So, but these are right, but these are still interesting things to come across. So one of the data pieces I have here, does having children affect women's incomes in Canada? So here we have the short answer is yes. According to Statistics Canada, on average, the earnings of women with children were 12% less than those of women without children. And this gap increased with the number of children. So with one child, the gap was 9%. With two children, it was 12%. And with three or more children, 20%. The earning gap is on the higher end for highly educated mothers. But many other factors influence individual outcomes. So work experience, education, industry, occupation, union membership. Sorry, I think the wind just opened my door. So I'm just going to close my door, I think, because yes.
No problem.
Just a second. There you go, back. I was wondering if I had an unexpected visitor.
No worries.
So anyway, we had that discussion a lot about how motherhood can impact income and career progression. And there's a lot of variables that impact that. There's many studies that weren't able to directly link motherhood with a fall in income. I mean, it's a tricky question, right? So again, work experience, education, industry, occupation, union membership, motivation, ability, all of that does impact, right? So don't think that because I have 2 or 3 kids already my income is less. But when we look at the earning patterns of men and women, ours are definitely shaped more by caregiving duties. And whether it's our pension plans or a CPP or all of that, those are variables that should be factored into a financial plan. And that's another thing we don't talk about a lot, right? My team and I are still building more robust resources on how to offset that motherhood penalty, the financial one. We need to talk about this as women so much more, right? We live longer, we retire earlier. We work as hard, if not twice as hard in many cases, because we're wearing these different hats. You need to have a financial plan as a working mom, right? If you're going to make all those sacrifices, you really need to manage that. So again, when you're looking at those statistics, Rachel, what popped to your mind when you read this section of the document?
Well, I think this section led into coming into not only earning potential, but then the next step is that maternal wall and how it impacts your employment or your employability. So those statistics didn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that if you have 1, 2, or 3 children, it goes from 12 to 20%. That's how much you'd be impacted financially. But that's assuming that you stay on the same career trajectory and that you return to work. Or it's assuming, I guess, that you would stay at the same job or return back to that same job or not take time off. So for example, I used to work with somebody who, she was having her 3rd child. So she would have been off on maternity leave, coming back on, going off on maternity leave again, and then coming back. And she, in her particular situation, she did take the full 12 months of leave. You take 18 months. And I think there's statistics that you've collected around the amount of time that you stay away from work or the number of months that you do. And the greater that gap as well, that also pushes that percentage higher. And then if you
6 months seems to be neutral, but anything beyond 6 months would have an impact. But please go on.
And then ongoing, and that's assuming you're either coming back to the same career or the same level, because oftentimes I find that career can go like this. It's a little bit of a game of snakes and ladders where it's not always you're not always entering into a company the next level up, or even at the same level. Sometimes you're going into an entry level position if you're changing your employer or you're changing your work environment. So those statistics, I feel like maybe there's some constant factors that would have to be in place for that to be even the best case scenario for mothers, because in more cases, and from reading this, being a working mom in Canada and how our careers affect our children, I think it's page 3, we go into women, stereotypes found that compared to women with identical resumes but no children, mothers were 79% less likely to be hired and then 100% less likely to be promoted. 100%?
I know I got challenged on that number. Somebody was like, well, that's 0 chance essentially being promoted. And in this particular study in this field, I think it was STEM or something like that, then in this particular study, yes, that was the case. It doesn't mean we could probably tap into research. I did even more research on where this came from. It was out of the States. It was a legal division of a specific university in California. But yes, those numbers are shocking, like that it can be up to that percentage, right? And again, might not be apply across all fields, but in some of the most competitive fields, then yes, that's what happened.
So I think in these, whenever I look at these statistics, I always imagine, I guess, examples in my head. So what if I were a mom leaving a nursing job and coming back to a nursing job, and then leaving my career again and coming back? What if I were working in academia and leaving the job and then coming back? Or like different industries and how that might look in different industries and be impacted by different industries, as well as, what if I left my career and then I were reapplying for a role? Am I 100% less likely to be hired compared to a counterpart if I had children versus the counterpart not having children? And is my child or my motherhood role impacting that? And of course, the answer is always no if it's on paper. But I mean, it's hard to deny the fact that you are often judged by the fact that you're a mom or that you could become a mom. It's an uncomfortable thing to think, but if you're the more qualified candidate and you're not chosen or promoted because of the fact that you're a parent, that's not good. That's not a good place to be in. It's not a good way to feel. So that's where I go. I mean, those different percentages, when I think about 12%, 20% and trying to make up for that gap, I then go to, well, what about the parents who don't stay in their roles and actually don't return for 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years?
Yeah.
And they're applying for something new, or maybe their role is phased out or changed, or, like there's a lot of different things that maternal wall that you talk about and that this conversation brings up, because I feel like this starts to impact it, right? Like when we're looking at this actual research about women getting promoted if they're a mother versus if they're not, and how they're 75% less likely to be hired. That is really shocking. That ended the stats for me. I thought, oh
you need to go and have a nice drink of something warm and comforting after you read that.
Terrible. It's terrible. And also too, in the material that you've provided, there's an excellent link to this leading study on the maternal wall bias. So this wall that's put up for moms, and there's some excellent videos that I think would very much illustrate this in different settings for people who aren't quite aware of these conversations or haven't been a part of them before, because there's 3 videos that you can watch. One that's it gives an example of a subtle bias, one that gives an example of a severe bias, and one that says there's no bias. So you're not at all being, judged, or, assumptions aren't being made based on your role at home or your role as a parent. And then in the other 2 examples, it was a severe judgment or a severe bias, and then a subtle bias. So, just the words that are being used and the way that the parents are speaking about their colleague, or even a manager is speaking to their team member due to the fact that they're a parent. It's just different conversations being had, and how clear it is when that bias comes out. And it's ingrained into the way our workforce thinks, the way we think about our roles as parents and the way we think about our roles as moms, and how dedicated we are if we have children. It's like there's an if that's put in there. Suzanne might be able to attend that conference if she's not needed at home over the weekend. Well, why wouldn't you ask Suzanne? Or why wouldn't you give Suzanne that opportunity regardless of whether or not she had children? Or, it's interesting to see how we change, and how our thinking has changed, and how we need to kind of switch our thinking, or remind ourselves that parents can be just as dedicated. And why don't we think that way?
Well, and this brings up big philosophical conversations about the type of society we want to build, and we are in those building stages, right? You and I are firmly established in our careers, and we're thinking when you have kids, I think what really changes, you really start thinking about that next generation so much more. Mm-hmm. How are my career choices? How are my my consumption choices, everything. It just comes more top of mind. What is going to be left for my children? And so, when I keep on going back to the slogan that you can be anything you want when you grow up, right? To girls, we say that, and then boom, I'm hearing so many stories on the ground. I don't know, women, for example, who got established in their careers, waited to have children, and now are struggling to have that family they're so longing for, right? Or women who are established in their careers and they have children, and then ultimately, they've invested so much in their education, and then all of a sudden they're plunged back into the working world, and we're like, what? But that's, I was supposed to have it all, and yet, and the childcare and the mental load and all of that. And so my key message here is, for anybody who's listening who doesn't have children yet, be aware of all these things and be very strategic. And when you're doing a career plan, you have to factor in whether you're a man or a woman. I would encourage you to do that career planning together and seeing how caregiving duties will impact those outcomes, and how are you planning for those caregiving duties impacting you. And you know what, men, we talk about men being supportive or allies, whichever word you find appropriate to use, is start those conversations, right? I had this super heated conversation with an amazing woman yesterday, and she was saying, well, men need to start talking about this. And I'm like, okay, well, what's in it for them? We've had talks in our group about some women being told that, well, you got the promotion because of your diversity and inclusion, hire or whatever, and so we're not prepared for those things. And so, yes, if you're listening to this and you're a man, please start having those conversations on behalf of your partner, so that no mom ever has to pump in a toilet while she hears other people fight. I say that, right?
Crazy. I actually don't know how I would. I start to think, if I were breastfeeding and needing to pump at work, where would I go? I would have to put a blind up on my window and door, or go into a room and lock it somewhere where I could go and sit. And how would that even be perceived by my colleagues? Interesting questions to think about.
And I want to be really careful, okay? Not saying that, we're not blaming anyone right now. Really,
No.
like, we're not saying this employer is bad or these people. No, I think we're really highlighting the focus that one of the big advantages too of having more women in those design roles or planning roles or leadership roles is because we start taking into those perspectives into account. If we've decided as a society that women are going to be working full time, right, in the world, and this could apply to so many other conversations about inclusivity, right? But we know a lot of the women are like, if at least 70% of couples are dual income, and so we assume that at least 70% of women are working. Well, women have children, 90% of them do, and so they will pump and breastfeed. And so are we designing real estate and infrastructure, and that's why we need to be having those conversations, so that down the road, that's really, like, things are changing, moving in the right direction. And then the next generation will talk about us having blind spots around whatever we've designed, but every generation will have its discussions, fights, and battles. So again, we're not blaming anybody for not having a nursing room today. Like, I think I love to use the analogy of the pumping in the toilet, because
we're evolving.
Right, we're evolving, and sometimes we're not, like, especially physical spaces. I mean, they can. One day would be nice if physical spaces could just adjust to the needs we have. But it's. I love that analogy of saying, "Would your husband eat a steak in the toilet?" No. and next generation buildings should have factor that in, right? You don't mix those two pieces. So,
right.
Any other thoughts on that?
No, I think it's. I think people might laugh, do you really think it's eating a steak in the toilet is equal to, pumping in the washroom? And well, when you really think about it, yes, it is. So what do you think? I'm going to ask my husband that later and see what he says. I'm interested to know what his reaction is. I'll just be curious. He'll probably look at me like, what are you talking about?
I think I need to put some sort of meme in the bathroom. Some sort of meme or however to raise awareness. When I was pitching our company to groups of investors, so the way I tried to help them understand what we experience is, okay, tomorrow I'm going to take away your professional cell phone, your title. I'll shred your financial plan to pieces. I tell you you're not the boss anymore. I tell you to recover from surgery, right? How would you feel? Oh, welcome to the motherhood penalty, by the way.
Feel alone, you feel kind of isolated, penalized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, there's so much to scroll through. I want to skip, because we're already at 30 minutes. I want to skip
Okay.
to the questions that we have
Okay.
to think about how our careers affect our children. So let's see, I knew I had some data, some research from Harvard Business Review on the impacts. I mean, the evidence of the benefits of children of working mothers, right? So I won't dive into that. It was in the New York Times by Claire Kane Miller. I probably should, but I don't want to explore that too deeply today. Maybe people want to do their own reading and research. So I think what's really important is not whether being a working mom is good or bad as a statement. I think what's important is for you to ask questions in your family, like, why is working important to you? And we laughed about that question, but many women can find themselves so unsupported after maternity leave, or so lost, that they ask themselves, is it worth it? And so you have to ask yourself, well, why am I working? Why is it important? What do I need to do to get through this period that's really hard? Because it is harder the first year after after maternity leave. You're still sleep deprived and all of that. So asking that question, why is it important to you? How does it benefit you and your family? What are the pros and cons of taking along maternity leave for your career and your family? How do you think Canada measures up to other countries when it comes to parental leave benefits and policies, childcare support systems? Like, it might seem like a high level question, but culturally, there are some societies that do make it easier for women, and a long maternity leave is a double-edged sword. A lot of women would love the opportunity to, one day a week be able to work if the infrastructure was set up, or stay connected, right? So what are your thoughts? Like, how would you, when you think about how your career affects your children? I mean, there's data that shows that if there's a mom working outside of the home, then I think the daughters, I'm not sure about the sons, but the daughters will end up making more. And so it does set precedents for what will happen for children. But what comes up for you, Rachel, when we think about how do our careers affect our children? Like, what popped into your mind as I sent that document your way?
Well, there's a lot of things. I think that our careers definitely impact our children on a number of different levels. First of all, if we have careers, just like you said, you're setting precedent for your children. And I think you're setting an excellent example for your children, regardless of your choice. But I think if you choose a career and you're working in a career, you're showing your children, I have a skill. I'm using my skill to impact my community. I am developing personally, and you're also able to show your children what success means to you, and how you kind of go about trying to balance your life. And our kids, as we know, they don't do as we say, they do as we do. So they're watching us and kind of following in our footsteps. And they're also seeing an example of what makes sense for them and reflected out in the world as well. So as they grow and move into different early learning environments, and then into school, and then into other forms of school, or wherever they're operating in society, whatever they grew up with, or whatever that example was that they grew up with, that's what they consider normal, right? So I think that careers are very positive for children. I think that, whatever mixed arrangement parents have kind of come up with, or however they're managing that at home, including single parents of all sorts, I think, one way or another, a career is a wonderful thing to have while you also have children. I don't think that is contestable. I think that that's just true. I think that children get a lot out of families and parents that have careers. And for every adult and for every mother, it's going to be a little bit different. Just based on, what they see and how they perceive their time and how they value their career and success, and also their family dynamics. So it's very much also to how did someone grow up? And then how does that impact their perception of what value a career has as well? That's how I see it. And personally, I grew up with two parents that worked, and I drew a lot of meaning from the fact that they loved their careers. And I saw my dad working in television. He worked in television for decades. And I would go to, take your child to work day and go and be in the studio at 2 and 7 in Lethbridge with my dad, and then at Global and CBC in Calgary. And I loved talking to all the anchors and the news people. And I loved to see where they did all the mixing for the.
I must have been thrilled to see you there too.
It was so fun, and I loved being there, and I felt like, there's these cameras and microphones and these sets, and how does this all work? And I really loved being somewhere I felt like information was shared and people were on camera. It was exciting for me. And when I was young, I was even in a commercial, and this started this interest for communicating and how do people talk and how do they share information. And that's why I loved as I grew up, I loved performing and doing things like that. And then my mom was a nurse for many, many decades and still is. So as I saw her in her career working long hours, but it was just what she had to do. And then she'd work 3 or 4 long days, and then she would be at home too. And I see career as something that's so positive, and it's something where you're impacting your community when you participate in an economic role as well. So it's going to look a little different for different parents and how they choose to do that. But for me, that's why I think working is important and a career is important. But then the second question you have is also too, what are the pros and cons of a long maternity leave or being away from work? I don't see maternity leave as a con, I don't see it as a bad situation, but I think that disconnection from your career, that can create that disconnection. But some parents and what some moms have done is fully stepped away from their roles, and they're just as busy and feel just as connected, but just in different ways. Yeah. So it's interesting. It's just interesting. And for career moms, I think it's great to know that, this is amazing. It's an amazing, important, valuable investment you're making in yourself and your children and their future on a number of different levels. That's what I think for sure. For sure.
Really interesting observations, and absolutely when I was talking about the pros and cons of a longer maternity leave, I think when women are trying to figure out whether they're going to take 12 or 18 months, right, or 6, or split it with their partners, it's good to think about the pros and cons of each for each partner, right? For their career, for their earning potential, for their mental health, for what it means for their families, and it's just a useful framework to do that analysis. Because I don't know, when I think, is there a perfect formula? I don't think there is, and probably there never will be. And I'm here to facilitate those conversations. Maybe my observation will surprise you, but I'm an entrepreneur, and so I've spent the last 4 years. Now things have stabilized a little bit, but there are years where I was working insanely long hours. And as an entrepreneur, you do not have a predictable stream of income in those first years, right? And so I did that while having 2 really young kids. And my oldest is 4, my youngest is 2. And I think back about the year I've had, and yes, there are moments where I ask myself, if I had a chance to do it over, would I do it differently, right? And it does pop into my mind. It does pop into my mind, because we don't get those years when the kids are really young back. And there are times in my career where I worked evenings and weekends, and then I worked 2 jobs. I worked my corporate job, and I'd work at lunch, and I'd work in the evening and weekends, right, too. So it was quite the stretch. And I hadn't really reflected on that before I became a mom, right? I really thought that I'd have kids and things would be smooth, and I wouldn't find myself questioning so much of what I believe to be true and right and just, and how I want to raise my kids, and what my career means to me, and what I'm willing and unwilling to sacrifice. And I don't know if this will be strange to hear that for people, because I do stand for working motherhood. I have from the start. I had 2 working parents. With my mom, we traveled internationally. Both of my parents spoke tons of languages. I never even questioned the possibility of not working. It wasn't even an option. And then there are other women close in my circles who had, let's say, many children and took a step back from their professional role, and then maybe later came back. But it wasn't even an option to explore. And I think every generation will have different answers, and our policymakers will have to grapple with that. But what is my bottom line here is, let's have more of those conversations about what it means to be a working mother. Yeah. What we need to be, the levels of leadership and career planning should be holistic. It should not be just, do you want to be a manager as your next career step, but how do all the pieces of a puzzle work together? How does being a parent enhance your skill set? How does it give you empathy? Do you maybe, at which stages of your children's ages do you want to consider certain moves? Like I was talking with a diplomat and I was thinking, well, when they're teenagers, where do you want to be? Right? In some stages of life, there are ages where kids can be so portable and it's easy to adjust them. But maybe when you're a teenager and they're teenagers and your parents are older, perhaps you're going to you want to be grounded in a place where you can reconcile being for them as they age and your kids wanting to have some stability. So that is my bottom line. You had that, my whole reflection on, is this good, is this bad, or whatever. One of the tools we bring forward in our community, and I've been asked to do workshops on dual career planning, is that 25-year career arc. And we look at like, how old are your kids going to be, right? And how old are your parents going to be? And how old are you going to be? And what matters for you in your career? Who do you want to work with? How much money do you want to make? What level of leadership? Certain leadership roles require 60 or 70 hours of work per week and being away from your family. Like strategically, you want to ask yourself those questions because you don't want to look back and say, oh my gosh, I was working 70, 80 hours per week when my kids actually wanted to be with me. Now they don't want to be with me, right? So that's the reflection. Does that bring anything up for you, Rachel, as I say that?
25-year arc. It's very interesting to think of your life that long. And how do you plan? I'm interested to know how you even start that plan with people and how you can, I mean, I know you have to anticipate, where you'll be in your career, but for the most part, people think 5 years, 10 years, 5 years, maybe. How do you start that?
Well, I'll say it shamelessly. That's my secret sauce, is the beginning of the Mom BA program. And it's our kind of formula. We help you take a step back and look at what really matters. And that's that big picture vision, right? So in 25 years, when your kids are by your side and you're looking back on what mattered,
right?
What mattered, right? And so we break it up into those different categories for your career, for your family, for your finances, all of that. Again, that's what we do in the first month of the Mom BA program. And that's what really helps our participants skyrocket their progress because they know what they want. They can lead with values and with confidence. Yes. And in a way, how that came up for me, Rachel, is when I was with my dad in his last moments. And, when you look back on what mattered, you think about those tiny little moments of the day when we're rushing and getting out the door in the transition moments with the kids. And sure, your career will have mattered, but when you're a parent, your relationship with your children and your legacy matters so much. Right. And so we should be strategic in terms of what we're building, because you want to look back and say, yes, I actually made intentional choices about the parent I'm going to be. And I knew when to say yes to my career, and I knew when to say no and to take a step back and be there for other things that matter. We're full humans. We're not just work robots, right? We do you live to work or do you work to live, and how do those pieces fit together? And so the 25-year vision does help to take a step back and say, like, what do I need to do today so that in 25 years I'm not weeping over things I completely neglected?
Right. You did your planning and you made a point to think about those things long term. I think that's so smart. And I think it's so wise to take a step back and do that work, because you're right. You will, at the end of your life, how have you balanced it and what does that mean to you? And a lot of times, a lot of us have never asked ourselves these questions. We've never led ourselves through these conversations or scenarios. And it's a big thing to think about. That's huge. It's huge. And I love how you lead that with values, but it will look different for every single person you have going through the program. So I think that's also extremely unique and a very cool component of the Mom BA. And another thing too that you touch on in this research is how your field also affects becoming a mother and your career prospects. And I was particularly surprised, I guess, by the STEM industry or the STEM field and how much dropout there was specifically from that field. Because, I mean, it asks what field or industry do you work in and what kind of evidence do you have about practices in your field? And of course, I've always worked in either communications, government, or marketing, some kind of component thereof. And I don't know. I mean, there's some perception in the field that more hours equal more productivity, I think. But I also heard the term too, work smart and you'll be able to get more done in less time. But I don't know exactly how this looks in terms of STEM. So science and mathematics. And I'm just interested to know how, especially mothers in STEM, how exactly this, like, why would they, why is it such a drastic difference between STEM versus other?
Well, okay, so from what I'm seeing, and I mean, it's a select sample, so I've dug a little bit deeper, but some of and it's not just women, right? So it's 43% of women leave full-time employment and 23% of men. With the statistics I've had, they might have been coming from the States. In Canada, we don't always have the exact equivalent research, but a lot of them quoted non-family friendly work environments. And I mean, like, let's face it, in very technical pieces of some engineering jobs that I hear is you're away for 60, 70 hours in the field doing field work, right? So just the nature of the work itself, and I know that a lot of men may not want it either. There's the fly in, fly out, and that's where I'll stop with my analysis because I'm not an operations specialist. And but some of these jobs are very hard to reconcile with having families, both for men and for women. So that's a discussion that, like, I would love to have with senior leaders in some of these companies. At the end of the day, do we really value having parents, and what kind of career planning strategies do you need? Because if you're looking at the lifespan, of it, I don't know, 30, 35-year career in engineering, like, do you do a season of your life where you're okay with fly in and fly out? And then do you step back and do something else for a certain period of time? I mean, I don't know. Going back to your question about time management, yes, that's another, like, we explore a number of tools in the Mommy program about getting more done in 12 weeks than you would in a whole year. So that there's a tool that we use. And finally, there's another thought I wanted to share with you, Rachel, but I forgot. I guess that would be for another show. If anybody is sticking around to listen. Any closing comments on the huge topic that we could probably pick up and talk about for another almost hour?
Interesting. First of all, I'm interested to know how we spark the conversation with people before they become parents and make it relevant to people who aren't parents. Number one, changing our attitudes and changing our thinking before we're parents, and even if we're not parents. And secondly, to definitely giving more training around negotiation and financial planning for women too. So I know you do both of those things as well. And I think that these topics would really support women in building their confidence and being able to, defend their values and what they need and believe in a work environment where some are parents and some aren't. And also too, the less likely that parents are to be, promoted into leadership and management type roles, then the less likely you will have these types of perspectives in leadership, and then the less likely change is going to be made. So I think women do really need to be loud about this topic, and we do really need to have these conversations, just sheerly due to the fact that it's obvious that there's forces working against it, and we have to be a little bit louder in order to kind of keep the ball moving and keep it pushing, because it is bigger. It's bigger than we think, and it does have to do with the attitudes in our environments and where we're working and changing. Kind of, it's a big topic, so it's very good to continue these conversations and provide that training to working parents and to career-minded.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm thrilled to say that I have more and more. Well, I guess it's women. I would love to have the conversations more with men, and my team will be working on that. But there's younger women reaching out to us and asking those questions and participating in our trainings. And sometimes some of them will say, oh, maybe it's too early for me to explore this. I'm like, no, you are in the right place. You need to know this stuff before you even consider growing a family. And then number two, in 2022, I've been asked, I'll be talking quite a bit more about dual career planning. So I've been asked by different professional associations and summits to offer workshops and how to involve men more in the conversations, even at the corporate level. So I hope that you'll be seeing more of that from us. And again, if you watch this show, you loved it, please share, invite others to follow us, find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. We have a summit next week, the Flow, Ease, and Rejuvenation Summit, that is just going to be out of this world transformational. I won't say more. It's just, if you haven't signed up, major FOMO. And then number two, in January, we're going to have a free workshop on personal branding as a mother and how to weave in your story of motherhood into your personal brand to advance and meet your career goals. So keep your eyes peeled, invite parents into this community. And thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Kinia and Rachel Jam. See you next time.